My name is John L. Milton, and I'm 93 years old. Although ever since I got in the Air Force, people call me Jack. In the first organization in the Air Force, there were a whole bunch of us that had the first name of John. And so they started calling us nicknames. And mine was Jack, and it stuck. So practically everyone who knows me calls me Jack. My father was the immigrant and quite a remarkable man. And he had an awful lot of influence on me throughout my life. We were living in a small town, Auburn, Kentucky, and there were only 3 Catholic families in the town. So of course we had no church, and we went to church at Franklin, Kentucky, which was about 10 miles away, which in those days was a long trip by auto. You know, poor roads and poor automobiles too. And even though my father had the bulk of the business, as he said, he had all the business in town, and I guess he did. When the stores closed at night, it became a different situation. Socially, we were not popular at all because we were Catholic. And the Ku Klux Klan was very active there, and Auburn didn't have much of a black population. And the Ku Klux Klan originally was not opposed to blacks anyway. They were primarily against Catholics and Jews. So we knew that we were not really welcome in that community. I didn't have a very pleasant experience in school. In fact, I very often had to fight my way to and from school because I was darker than the rest of them and an outsider, and I was a Catholic, you know. And the Catholics, at one point, they actually burned the fiery cross right in front of our house. And I guess I must have been about 7 years old, and I was pretty upset about that situation. But my father handled it, you know, quite well. And nobody ever did that anymore. But we were not very popular in town. My father felt that we were not getting enough Catholic influence in the children's lives, mine and my 4 siblings. So he decided in the midst of the Great Depression to move us to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where we could go to a Catholic school and get a Catholic education. To pick up in the middle of the Depression and move was something that was very serious. In fact, he often said afterwards that it was the worst business decision that he ever made, but it was the best family decision that he ever made. And I would certainly go along with that. I would agree with him on that. Well, if I hadn't gone to St. Joseph's, I don't think I would have had the knowledge of the faith. And the knowledge of the faith, of course, is the thing that's made the faith the most important thing in my life. Secondly, having had the benefit of the education there, we had nuns in those days, and they were strict, they were disciplined, and that carried over into my way of life, and it's been with me my entire life. Knowing my faith as well as I do, I always felt that I had something to fall back on. And if I were really in a difficult position, I could always fall back on my faith. I was in college in my freshman year, first semester freshman year at Western Kentucky when World War II occurred, when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And I was also in ROTC, and I thought I'd probably go into active duty immediately, but they told our class to stay where we were because they had plenty of recruits coming in, and they didn't have enough material to train them all, or the facilities to train them all. And they didn't actually call our class to active duty until May of 1943. And about that time, the Air Corps came around to all the Army bases, recruiting people that could qualify for flight training because they were losing so many crews, so many aircraft in daylight bombing over Europe. So I took the test and was qualified and joined the Air Corps at that time and went through flying training. We met when I was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and she was working as a fashion model in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we actually met in Louisville, which is her hometown, and she was going home to Louisville for the Thanksgiving holiday, and I was going to Bowling Green, to my hometown, but I stopped in Louisville because a friend, who happened to be also a friend of Samantha's, was having a Thanksgiving party, and we met at that party. We arranged to meet later on, and the courtship lasted about 3 years for a lot of reasons. One principal reason was that we were 50 miles apart, and so we didn't get a chance to see each other every day. And I was also traveling a lot in my Air Force responsibilities. So it took about 3 years to really come to the conclusion that, although I think we knew from the very beginning that we were made for each other, but took that amount of time to get to know each other better and know that it was the thing for us to do. She was not a Catholic at the time, but she converted. We were married in the Catholic Church, and she converted later to Catholicism. And again, I think the faith had an awful lot to do with her and my life, from that time on. The fact that we were somewhat opposite people, opposite in characteristics, was a big help, because I frequently had jobs that required a lot of entertaining, and that was right up her alley. She was so good at that, and I wasn't. So it was fortunate that she was, I didn't have to worry about it if we had to entertain, because she did it so well. We were married in Dayton, Ohio, and a year later transferred to Fairbanks, Alaska. And I remember her mother said, "You're taking her to the end of the world," and it was just about the end of the world. Sammy just fit right in, and of course I did too, with my flying activities and everything. And throughout our career, Sammy would, wherever we went, and we had some rather strange assignments, but wherever we went, she would immediately fit into the community, and she was determined to make the best of the assignment, and she always did. And of course that helped me tremendously too. We had an assignment down in the Congo right after independence, and went through 2 rebel-led wars down there, and it was dangerous. It was a dangerous life. The rebels were infiltrating in the city, Leopoldville, where we lived, and we knew that, and everybody knew that, but we didn't know who they were, obviously. I took them an old Chicago submachine gun away from a rebel, and about once a month we would go out for a few hours and practice. And we always took our number 1 houseboy with us, because he knew that she could use that gun, and he would spread the word around. We knew that he would spread the word around, so that would add a lot to the safety of the household. She would defend herself if she had to. After World War II, I was fortunate enough to be one of about 15 pilots that they chose from Air Force wide resources to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and be experimental test pilots. Principal project that would continue throughout that period of time was one of standardizing airplanes, airplane design, and airplane equipment. And one of the things I did was I designed a system where we could photograph pilots' eye movements when they were flying various maneuvers. And it involved placing a camera on the instrument panel, or placing a mirror on the instrument panel with a stopwatch on it, and photographing the pilot's eye movements through that mirror as they were reflected in that mirror. As we improved the design of instruments, we could plug a new instrument into that panel and see how long it took the pilot to absorb the information compared to the old design. I often tell people that whenever I fly on an airliner these days, I take a peek in the cockpit, and basically the system that we came up with is the same one that exists today. I was assigned to only one combat flying organization, and that was in Southeast Asia. And I was a director of plans. I was a senior officer at that time, and so I wasn't flying myself very often, but I was a director of plans in a division of C-130 cargo airplanes that were remoted to Taiwan. That was part of my Taiwan experience. Our aircraft and crews would fly from Taiwan into Vietnam and fly missions there for 2 weeks, and then come back to Taiwan to do maintenance on the airplanes, give the pilots a couple of days off, and then repeat the experience. And I would fly some of those missions, but I didn't do it regularly like the regular pilot. And that was my only assignment as in a combat flying organization. But I flew combat missions in the Congo as an air attaché. Air attachés usually don't get mixed up with that sort of thing, but it was different in the Congo. So I flew combat missions. I actually got a Distinguished Flying Cross, which is a combat decoration for the Congo experience. My last 3 stateside assignments were in the Pentagon. The Pentagon is a very different type job, and if you can do the job there, they keep bringing you back, you know. My first assignment there was in intelligence, and I went from there to the air attaché assignment in the Congo, and then I came back from the Congo and headed the Special Air Warfare Division right at the time of the big buildup in Vietnam, and was responsible for expanding the Special Air Warfare Force from 14 squadrons to 52 squadrons in 3 years to support Southeast Asian requirements. And my final assignment in the Pentagon, where I came back from Taiwan and went to graduate school and then back to the Pentagon for my final assignment, was in public information. Every time I changed assignments, practically every time, it was a new experience completely. And so it was challenging to learn the requirements of the job and then learn how to perform it and do it well. But I liked that, and it kept me interested all the time. And the same thing happened in my civilian career later on with Merrill Lynch. They were always coming up with new products and so forth. So it was always something was always a learning experience to learn what the product was and how to market it and so forth. I retired from the Air Force in 1974, September of 1974. And there was so much antagonism from the public towards Vietnam and anything associated with Vietnam. So when I knew I was going to retire after 31 years in the Air Force or in the military, American University here had established a course called Strategy for Career Transition. And I took that course. And the first thing the instructor told us was, you're going to have to conceal the fact that you were in the military or you'll never get a civilian job. There's just too much animosity. you can get a job in defense industry, but that's about the extent of it, of getting a good job and forming a new career plan. And they were right. They were right. So we just took a year off and took our golf clubs and visited all the warm spots like Florida and California and New Mexico and Arizona and so forth. We did that for a year. About the time that year ended, I was approached by United Technologies to go to Africa. I had my final meeting with them to find out exactly what they wanted me to do. And we had it at the Marriott Hotel. And it turned out they wanted us to move around Africa every 6 months to introduce the company to each region of Africa. And then after 3 or 4 years of doing that, we would decide on a permanent location. And Sammy and I both decided that we had lived out of suitcases so long that we didn't want that kind of job again. So I turned the job down, and as I was leaving the hotel, I passed a ballroom that had a sign that said job fair. And the longest line was in front of the Merrill Lynch booth. So I got in that line, and when I got up to the head of the line, the head of the manager of the Merrill Lynch office in Washington was asking just a few questions and making a snap judgment about who he wanted to interview in greater detail. So he invited me to his office in Washington for an in-depth interview, and I went, and Merrill Lynch has no antagonism towards the military. They like the military. So anyway, I was offered a job, and I took it, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I spent almost 30 years then with Merrill Lynch. A fighter pilot's experience is pretty much similar to what a financial advisor does, and I say that in a good way, good way in every respect. And so I think the job was less difficult for me because of my military experience, right? Frankly, living by my faith and my Merrill Lynch principles and so forth, I would say that my greatest achievement there was the huge number of people that I helped achieve financial ability, capability. In other words, I made an awful lot of people wealthy. But of course, I reaped the rewards too. St. Joseph School, again, that's been the most important thing of that type in my whole life, 93 years of it. And being a private institution, I knew that they were probably always having financial troubles. And I wanted to be sure that they stayed around because of all that they had done for me. After I started making money at Merrill Lynch and had money to distribute, that was where I went first to make a big contribution. The other educational contribution, a sizable contribution, has been at the University of Maryland. And that was because how much I appreciated the opportunity they made available by having that campus in the Pentagon. And that was the only way that I had been able up to that point to take classes to finish my bachelor's degree. When I left Western, I had about 2.5 years of college, and I never did anything about that. I never had an opportunity to do anything about that until I came back to the Pentagon from the Congo in 1965. And at that time, the University of Maryland had set up a campus in the Pentagon. And at 6 o'clock in the evening, the conference rooms in the Pentagon became classrooms. And so that in the 2.5 years I had left on that assignment, I was able to get 2 years of credits and get my bachelor's degree. They had campuses all over the Air Force, all over the military, really, and in combat situations and everything else. You still do. So I thought that was a place that I could make a contribution, and that's why I made the big contribution there. Sammy had a stroke 14 years ago, actually September the 11th, the year after 9/11. And so she had a stroke about 14 years ago. And it was a hemorrhagic stroke, which is the most dangerous kind. The prognosis is about 30 days. And her prognosis was 30 days. But we had good medical care, and Nora, who still lives with us, joined us at that time as a registered nurse, live-in registered nurse. And so instead of 30 days, it was 14 years. Most of which were good years. Nora lived in, and her husband David lived in Uganda. And Nora was recruited to come to the United States because she was a nurse, and we had a shortage of nurses. And so she came over before David. David had to go through the regular process of immigration and getting a work visa and then becoming a citizen and so forth. So Nora was here, and after Sammy was in rehabilitation center, and I was talking to a friend in Sammy's room about the fact that she wanted to go home and that we were planning to take her home, but that I needed to find a live-in nurse. And one of the nurses at the center there heard me talking, and so she approached me and said, I've got the person you need. My sister, who's a registered nurse, is working for a hospital over in Maryland, and she doesn't like it. And I think she would be the kind of person that would fit in your situation exactly, and she would like that too. So I interviewed her and hired her on the spot, and she's been with us ever since. It took about another year before David was able to come over and join us, and they had no children at that point. They had been unable to have children, and in the 14 years they've been with us, they've got 4 kids. So Sammy and I have no children of our own, and we have enjoyed having these kids around too. And they've sort of grown up as part of the family, really. But it's been 7 months now, and I go through it every day, but it's easier. It's easier as time goes by. The fact that Nora and David and the kids are here has made it much easier to bear. During her time in the hospital, after her stroke, a priest from one of the retired priests in residence at St. Agnes visited the hospital every day and brought communion to Sammy, and was there every day, 7 days a week. And I decided I wanted to join that church where he was. After we got out of the hospital and the rehab centers and so forth and came home, we tried to go to Mass every Sunday, but Sammy fainted twice. And we just decided that we couldn't do that any longer. So they brought communion to Sammy at home every week. Being as well grounded in my faith as I am, again, not being an expert, but I've been able to approach difficult projects with confidence, knowing that I didn't expect miracles, but miracles happen. And I always felt that I could persevere and complete whatever I wanted to do. My career's always been based on the fact that that with persistence I could accomplish almost anything, and I never ever gave up on anything. I'm confident I would not have been able to accomplish what I have done without that formative period at St. Joseph. And not only in my business, my various careers, so forth, but of course my religious background too. The best experience I ever had.